Franz Kafka wrote to a friend, "I think we ought to read only the kind of books that would wound or stab us. If the book we are reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? So that it will make us happy? Good Lord, we would be happy precisely if we had no books." Now, this might sound a little extreme to some people until you look at what most people actually read today and why they read it. Fantasy novels that let you escape into worlds where you're the hero, or romance novels that deliver perfect love and happy ending, or even self-help books that tell you your feelings are valid and you're doing great no matter what. Books chosen specifically because they won't challenge the reader. They won't disturb them and make them question anything fundamental about themselves or the world. We have essentially developed an entire culture around reading for comfort. Book talk celebrates escapism. Self-care rhetoric treats reading as relaxation, or as something that should make you feel good rather than making you think hard thoughts. Publishers market books based on how soothing and smooth they are, or even how much they'll affirm what the reader already believes. And when someone does encounter a challenging book, maybe something by Dostoevsky or Kafka or Camus, they often abandon it halfway through because it's either too dark or depressing or not what they need right now. Now, Kafka's letter challenges this entire framework. If you want to be happy, he says that you should just not read books at all. Just go and live your life, enjoy the comforts, and avoid confronting actual difficult truths. But if you're going to read and dedicate hours of your finite life to sitting with actual texts, then we need to read books that transform us, which means books that wound us. Read books that force us to confront things that we might rather avoid or destroy our comfortable certainties, because reading is supposed to be about transformation and why we resist it so fiercely, and what we are losing when we choose comfort over confrontation. Now, transformation through reading doesn't necessarily happen when a book confirms what you already believe or makes you feel good about yourself. It only happens when a book forces you to see something that you might have been avoiding, and that confrontation is necessarily painful. And this is why Kafka says that books should wound. The wound is the mechanism for the transformation. Socrates built his entire philosophical method on this precise principle. Know thyself. Knowing thyself actually requires examining your beliefs until you find the ones that you can't defend, admit that you are ignorant in that subject, and confront the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. The Socratic dialogues are full of people who get angry and defensive when Socrates questions them because self-knowledge hurts. It destroys the comfortable story that we've been telling ourselves about our own wisdom and virtue. And this is what literature that wounds actually does. It's Socratic examination. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground makes us recognize the underground man's spite and resentment and self-destructive pride in ourselves. When we read it, thinking that we're nothing like this pathetic narrator, but then slowly we start to realize that we are like him, and that we've done these same self-sabotaging things for the same twisted reasons. The book wounds us by showing us our own vices in a character that we can't dismiss or ignore. Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan forces confrontation with mortality in a way that reading statistics about death never could. Ivan is dying and realizes his entire life has been a waste. He has followed social conventions, pursued career advancement, maintained appearances, and none of it meant anything. And of course, we can all recognize ourselves in him. Recognize that we might also be living conveniently and avoiding thinking about death while wasting our finite time on things that don't matter. So the book wounds us by making death visceral and personal rather than abstract. Nietzsche's genealogy of morals attacks the moral framework that some of us have built our identity on. If you're a Christian, he argues that your morality is a slave morality, or resentment of the strong disguised as virtue. If you're secular and progressive, he argues that you are still operating within Christian categories that you might not even realize. The book wounds us by showing us that what we thought were obvious moral truths are historically contingent and psychologically suspect. Now, what all of these books share is that they don't let us remain comfortable. They force us to examine beliefs that we might have never questioned and confront truths that we have been actively avoiding. And this confrontation is what makes transformation possible, because nobody can change what they won't acknowledge. Now, John Stuart Mill argued that even true beliefs become dead dogma if you've never examined them through encounter with opposing views. You might believe something to be correct, but if you believe it because that's just simply what you've always believed, and because that's what everyone around you believes, then you don't necessarily understand it. Instead, we are simply holding it as inherited prejudice rather than examined truth. And books help us to examine this truth. Books that wound are how we transform dead dogma into living truth. They present the strongest possible challenges to what we believe and force us to think through why we believe it, and make us confront the weaknesses in our own reasoning that we have literally never noticed. And this process is painful, and it takes time to learn how to do this, because it requires admitting that we might be wrong and acknowledging gaps in our understanding, accepting that our comfortable certainties are much more fragile than originally thought. Transformation requires this kind of discomfort. You can't examine your beliefs while remaining entirely comfortable with them, and you can't confront difficult truths while avoiding difficulty. The wound is necessary. It's the crack that lets the light in, and the destruction of the old structures that makes space for building something better. But if transformation through reading requires confronting uncomfortable truths, then the obvious question is why we resist this so fiercely. Why do we choose fantasy and romance and self-help over Dostoevsky and Kafka and Nietzsche? Why do we abandon the challenging books halfway through? Well, Schopenhauer's philosophy offers one simple answer: that human beings are fundamentally driven by will, a blind, meaningless striving that seeks pleasure and avoids pain. We are not rational creatures who occasionally seek out pleasure, but instead we are pleasure-seeking creatures who occasionally use reason to justify what we were going to do anyway. And reading challenging literature disturbs us, makes us uncomfortable, and destroys these comforting illusions. So we avoid it the same way we avoid any other source of suffering. But he also argued that this pleasure-seeking creates a very large trap. When you're striving for something, you suffer from wanting it. And when you get it, you suffer from boredom because the desire is satisfied. You are essentially caught on a pendulum between suffering and boredom, and the only escape is through something like aesthetic contemplation or ascetic denial that most people are not capable of. The comfortable reading that we choose, like fantasy and romance, just keeps us on this pendulum, alternating between wanting the next book and being briefly satisfied before wanting another. Without the ability to read challenging books, we cannot create or grow or become something higher than we already are while remaining comfortable. The discomfort is the catalyst for transformation, and eliminating discomfort means eliminating the possibility of genuine change. And the result is that we have created a culture where choosing comfort over challenge is celebrated, and admitting that something disturbed us is a sign that a book was bad rather than a sign that it was doing its job. And that transformation is something we pursue through affirmations and gentle encouragement rather than through difficult confrontation with uncomfortable truths. And so, I don't make this video to say that you can never read fantasy or romance or even self-help books, but instead, I thought this would be a good video to do because most of the books that we are reading now are exactly these. And none of the books that we read have anything to do with challenging our views of ourselves or even our views of the world. Now, reading challenging texts, even if they're not necessarily philosophical in nature, can guide us through understanding who we are on the inside, and also to understand that the world might be a little bit different than what we originally thought it to be. And so, the next time that you get ready to actually pick up a book, whether it's a physical copy or an online version, just be sure that we are not picking it up just because it's for entertainment or comfort, but instead that it might be something that challenges our beliefs about who we are. Because at the end of the day, the only way that we are ever going to grow as an individual and as a society is to challenge who we are. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.